The San Diego Padres pull off the stunner of the day, bringing back starting pitcher Michael King on a 3-year, $75 million deal with opt-outs after the first and second year. Absolutely surprising that the Padres were able to bring him back, especially when it had been well reported that there were 3 finalists for Michael King. Obviously, we discussed those the past couple of nights anyway, the Red Sox, Yankees, and of course the Baltimore Orioles. Ultimately, he decides to go back to his former team in the San Diego Padres. Got to wonder what this means for Luis Rise and other free agent targets that the Padres might ultimately target. Also got to wonder what this means for the Padres organization going forward. This is probably what's left of their finances that they could spend this offseason. That means they're likely going to have to find a trade somewhere to save themselves a little bit of cash here. Now, of course, they could probably do a couple of $1 million deals, but this is going to be the majority of the money that they're going to have to spend here this offseason. Surprising that they're able to bring him back. Now, the contract itself isn't too bad in the early stages of the contract anyway. I believe if it turns out that he opts out after the first year essentially turns into a 1-year, $22 million deal. By year 3, the whole thing could be worth up to $75 million total to Michael King. Got to think a couple of factors here went into play here. One, of course, was how comfortable he was playing in San Diego last year and how comfortable he's gotten being out there. I think that speaks volumes for what San Diego is building as far as a team. You hear about Juan Soto leaving, and you got to wonder, with the big contracts and the bloated payroll that they're going to have with a couple of big salaries there, how much are they still going to try to strive for being in contention? Well, this tells me that they're still going to have an eye towards at least being competitive in that division. Now, the fact that they're able to bring him back on a relatively inexpensive deal for what I thought he would get in free agency tells me that maybe the guaranteed years weren't really there from the other ball clubs. Shame on the Baltimore Orioles, shame on the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, but I'm going to give the primary blame here to the Baltimore Orioles and the New York Yankees. You have to get that deal done if you're Baltimore. I mean, how many times are we going to see starting pitcher after starting pitcher not sign a long-term contract with the Baltimore Orioles? Hats off to you for bringing in Pete Alonso, but offense was really your first half issue. It hasn't been the issue for the last 4 or 5 years. It's been that starting pitching, being able to get those young starters to ultimately reach their ceiling. They make the trade for Ward and send out Rodriguez in that deal. Not saying I'm lamenting the loss of Rodriguez, but at a certain point, how many arms are you going to trade for at the deadline or in the offseason? Not re-sign because you want to see what their market is in free agency, and then say, I don't really want to pay the price tag here. You look at Michael King's number here, I think he's happy with the average annual value overall of the deal. If he does end up staying 3 years in San Diego, it's basically a $25 million average annual salary. Even if he just stays the 1 year, still $22 million. I expected him to get around $4 for $80 million from the Orioles or another team. That seems like a fair trade-off to get the guaranteed years and the $80 million over a 4-year period. But if you're getting 3 for $75, heck, if he does terribly during the first 2 years of that deal and he opts into into that contract and has a decent final year, he can get a 1-year, $5 million deal to get there. So the Padres were creative in the way they structured this offer to at least make it competitive with some of the longer-term deals with guaranteed years on those deals might have been from those 3 finalists that we mentioned. And it also tells me that these teams didn't really pony up here when the Padres raised the ante. So Got to think Michael King, even though he may have really enjoyed his time in San Diego, I think he would have preferred a 4 or 5 year guaranteed deal worth $20 to $25 million if these teams are offering it. Tells you that wasn't on the table from these ball clubs. Be curious to see what the offers ultimately turn out to be. But the Michael King deal is official as he has passed his physical anyway. Going to be announced fairly shortly if it hasn't been already. But what a start to our video here, bringing Michael King back to the San Diego Padres. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe. Welcome into the MLB Hot Stove Daily here at the Upside Sports Network. If you're new here, be sure to hit that like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, Upside Sports Network as well. If you want to, feel free to send us a message in our chat, try to catch up with some of those messages. Ethan, Andrew, welcome back. Appreciate you guys joining us once again. 3 for 75, that means Arraez is done in San Diego. I do agree that this is probably the majority of the free agent dollars that we're going to see allocated from the Padres. Now, could they find a way to offload some more salary, i.e. Jake Cronenworth? I think they're going to be creative in the ways that they're able to do so. And as far as Arraez not going back to San Diego, I didn't really think he was going to go back there anyway. I think that they would like to bring him back, but I think they have so many other priorities, specifically in that starting rotation, that's going to preclude them from bringing back Arraez. Now, Arraez's market is kind of a mystery right now. I mean, he's kind of a one-off kind of a player. High average, high on base percentage guy. Doesn't strike out a whole lot. Doesn't walk a whole lot either. And is a contact hitting machine. Now, that type of player doesn't really exist in our game, so it'll be kind of a test case, kind of a trial balloon to see if that player can still make a little bit of money here. I think he'll probably get a 2-year guarantee, most likely. If the bidding around him gets a little bit more frenzied, maybe a 3-year deal. But I'd expect somewhere between a $12 and $15 million average annual value for Arraez. That would be something the Padres could have afforded if they didn't have these other needs. But sadly, they just need more starting pitching. We shall see if they're able to get the starters that they need. Andrew, I saw a report today that Imai will choose from the Yankees or Cubs. We actually talked about that last night as well, that the finalists for Imai were seen as the Cubs and Yankees. Bob Nightingale was reporting that yesterday on Foul Territory and was confirmed by several other industry experts as well. So pumped Rangers didn't match the $5.5 million for Armstrong. Made my day, to be honest. Let's see. We'll go ahead and get through a bunch of other headlines that we saw, but we'll kind of keep it going here. Andrew, can you see Murakami to the Phillies and then trade a package of Bohm and Strom for something? I suppose, but what's the or something? For me, Murakami is more of an unknown wild card, I guess is the best way I could describe it there. Could he have a great year? Could he be the next great thing? Could he be the next Kyle Schwarber? Absolutely. But on the other hand, what you kind of have in both of those two players that you mentioned there in Bohm and Strom. I would be more comfortable if I were the Phillies, probably holding on to both of those guys. If I do bring in Murakami, I don't necessarily see them being so quick to move on from Alec Bohm. I think they're going to try to maximize his value if they can before spring training and see if they can at least get something of value in return. But again, it's just so wide open on Murakami. He could literally go anywhere. Who really knows where he is going to land is anybody's guess. Pibby, welcome in. Cobra, welcome back. Tim, appreciate you guys joining us this evening. This means Padres are spending? No, I think this is pretty much the majority of what San Diego will spend. Now, if they're able to offload a little bit of money here, maybe they could offer somebody else a $5 to $10 million contract. That would be within the budget constraints of the San Diego Padres. Remember, they're losing Luis Arraez, they're losing Dylan Cease. They were set to lose Michael King out of that rotation. They have a little bit of money that they can still play with here, but not nearly to the levels of going after a $20 million starting pitcher after Michael King. So they've got their money sunk in a bunch of different positions right now. A couple of guys who will be injured for the majority of the season as well in Darvish. Musgrove is going to be coming back from injury. How much are you going to get out of Bogaerts this year? Machado is always good, but he's not quite to the level of what his contract is worth, but he's still a good player. Tatis, obviously positive value there in Merrill, but this team has a little bit, and I mean a little bit of money that they can still spend. Let's see here. Cobra, did not see that coming. I did not either. The entire industry, I don't think, really saw this one coming. I'm sure they, all would say the caveat, oh, well, he could always go back to the San Diego Padres. Well, when you say with a definitive look at the situation around Michael King, and for the better part of this week, we've been told over and over and over again, it's the Orioles, Yankees, and Red Sox. I believe you when you say those are the finalists. When you tell me that there may still be an avenue back to the Padres, unless you're actually describing a pathway for it that makes sense to me, I'm going to say you're just trying to, give kudos to his former team that at least they'll still be in the running. And hey, it was nice having you, but we can't afford it. Good luck with your next team. I think that's more the way the national media and a lot of the insiders were really phrasing it for the Padres. They weren't seen as a team that was still in there for Michael King, and lo and behold, they're the team that's able to get it done. Congratulations to the San Diego Padres and their fans. You get to keep a fan favorite there in San Diego. Tim, should the Mets trade Senga, Beatty, Mauricio, Clifford, Thornton, and Snyder to the Padres for Liriano and Miller? That ain't going to get it done. It's a decent package, I'll give you that. But it's nowhere near the value to me for Miller. I would need to have Jonah Tong in that trade, and that's apparently what the ask has been from the San Diego Padres. You're probably not going to get Nolan McLean, but I think there's a legitimate case to be made that they could be able to get away with a Jonah Tong in that deal. You need a blue chipper in that deal. Could you go and use a lot of these pieces in that deal and try to make it work? Absolutely. But for me, I need a blue chip piece back that's going to go in the rotation for the next 6 years, and I would demand on getting one of those blue chip pitching prospects that's ready to be in the rotation day one this upcoming season. Cobra, guess that's why they got rid of Cease. They weren't going to be able to pay for Cease nowhere near that level of money here, but the money here committed to Michael King is much more palatable for them. 3 for $75, if they have to pay every single dollar, is certainly something they could afford. Andrew, for a fifth starter, and I saw Strom is most likely getting traded per Passan. He is on the list of most of trade candidates this offseason, absolutely. But I wouldn't necessarily put it too high on the list of priorities for teams interested in relievers. As far as a fifth starter for Bohm, I suppose. But for me, I need a guy that's going to take over for Suarez if you lose him in free agency. That would be my ask in return for Bohm, and you're not going to get that. A fifth starter does nothing for me if I'm Philadelphia. That's a depth piece in my bullpen once we get to October, and it's all about October for me if I'm the Phillies. Cobra, we did get McKenzie for Cleveland. Let's go ahead and check out some of the headlines from today while we're at it. Let me go ahead and just kind of run through some of these. Bear with me for just a moment. Baseball Trade Values is the site we're looking at right now. All right. A couple of teams have finalized their coaching staffs today, but as far as some minor league deals that did get done, the Padres do sign Tristan McKenzie, coming off of injuries, poor performance, a mixture of the two, but still a really high-value pitcher when he's right. If he turns into a starting pitcher for the Padres on opening day, I think that'd be an A-plus signing for them. Curious to see if he's able to get to that point. Jorge Alcala, a guy who was traded twice last season, ultimately signs a minor league deal with the Blue Jays. He's kind of a middle relief option, fifth, sixth inning guy at best. He's kind of a power pitcher that really struggles with command at times. If you can get something out of him for a couple of months, if you're the Blue Jays, that's a well worth it signing for your minor league system. Herget, minor league deal to the Mets, and then 4 pitchers going to the Tigers on minors deals as well. But again, the big story of the day, of course, is Michael King going to the San Diego Padres. All these trades we were hyped up and nothing happening. No kidding, Ethan. Where are these trades, man? I mean, now that Michael King is off the board, I do expect to see a little bit more activity on the trade front. I think he was kind of the first group, or one of the first starting pitchers of that group in the between the $25 to $15 million starter. We should start to see that market get to move, whether it be on the free agent side of things or the trade. I do think this is the first domino in that range to really go. Arms like Zach Gallen, arms like Edward Cabrera on the trade market, Keller on the trade market, could all be moved fairly quickly now because we have kind of a price being set by the Padres with this deal. So the market now knows what to do with these types of pitchers, and we'll see what deals we can get out of it relatively soon, hopefully, for those of us wanting to see some activity over the winter meetings. Didn't get it. This was supposed to be an active week according to the majority of people out there, and yet again, a little bit disappointed on the trade front. Free agent news is started coming in a little bit faster this week, and hopefully we keep this pace going throughout the remainder of this week as well. Jay Palmer, welcome in. Ocean View, welcome back as well. Does this now mean other starting pitchers will start to sign with other teams? Absolutely. So we just discussed there. Ocean View, whoever trades for Miller has to take Bogarts? Absolutely not. If I'm the Padres, as much as I would love to get out of the Bogarts deal, Miller is really the one pathway I have to secure blue chip pieces coming back to my team. You gave up, what, the number two, or I forget how high DeVries was viewed in the industry anyway, but one of the best prospects in the entire game off to the Oakland, or I guess you'd call it the Athletics now, in the deal for Mason Miller. Now, you got J.P. Sears out of the deal. To me, whoop-de-freaking-do. He should be a AAA arm at best. Now, if you're counting on him for real innings at the Major League level, he can't do it. We've seen it time and time again. Unless, of course, he's facing the Rangers, then he might be good for a perfect game. But that's because of how poor the Rangers' offense is against him for whatever the reason. But Sears is not a good pitcher outside of that. The deal was made for Mason Miller, and to pollute the value of Miller with a Bogarts deal, I mean, you'd still be underwater in it. You have to eat some more money on that contract, and there's no way you're getting some blue chip pieces out of that trade in return. You might get some salary relief on Bogarts. You might get a couple of decent prospects, but you certainly ain't getting Jonah Tong, which has been said to be the ask as well. All right, let's try to catch up on a few more of these comments. I want to see all these trades those experts were trying to say. Absolutely. Oh boy, Dodgers. Well, appreciate you coming back at least. Get the spare change under the curtains. Well, they do have a little bit more money, it looks like, than what they were attempting to frame their offseason as. And, with an aggressive general manager like Preller, he was probably, poking and prodding any way he could to kind of get his guys back in there. And I do expect them to try to save a little bit of money on either A, the types of free agents they bring in to round out this roster, or B, the trades that they're able to make to offload a little bit of salary to kind of, make up the difference, if you will. But I do like the move for the Padres. They needed starting pitching. We talked about them going into the year with Nick Pivetta and a bunch of question marks after that in that starting rotation. For me, this really solidifies at least the top half of that rotation, especially with the conversation around the Mets trades of possibly bringing in Nick Pivetta, Miller, and Laureano in a kind of a three for whatever the package might be back from Mets type of a trade. So that, I think, opens the door a little bit more to the possibility of moving on from Nick Pivetta. But again, 1-year deal essentially with player options for year 2 and year 3. We shall see with the lockout looming next year with the CBA negotiations and so forth. I think this is a great deal for the pitcher. That way he can kind of gauge the market and see how he does, and really have an opportunity to hit the get rich next year as well. Let's see here. Or did the Padres get a payday loan? I don't think they got a payday loan. Mets and the Padres are supposed to do a trade. I mean, we've been talking about that for about 2 weeks now. The original headlines, everybody was hoping it would be Fernando Tatis. If you're a New York sports fan, that obviously wasn't happening. I think it's going to center around Miller now at this point. It's not even Christmas yet, and the market is pretty thin at the top. It was already pretty thin, but before we even got to the winter meetings. I mean, Cease had already come off the board. Vlad Guerrero Jr. had already signed in April. This was a market that was not necessarily filled with a lot of top-end talent that was going to change teams. It wasn't the winter meetings where you had 5 different shortstops of high caliber on the market. We're talking like the Seagers, the Dansby Swansons, that type of a market. It's not the Prince Fielder, Albert Pujols winter meetings either. That type of talent just wasn't really on the market this year. Now, Kyle Tucker and Bellinger are still really nice options offensively, but in their prime, obviously, Fielder and Pujols were viewed as better players offensively. Now, as far as defensive abilities, Tucker's obviously a very nice piece right now because he can still play the outfield. Pujols and Fielder, first baseman, diminished fielding value. But for right now, I would argue that this offseason we kind of knew wasn't necessarily filled with the Juan Sotos, the Aaron Judge, the Shohei Ohtanis of the world. But there's still some good options out there, and we'll see where this market ultimately decides to go the rest of this offseason. At least the Padres will play at Dodger Stadium. Ouch. Tong and McLean. I would just say that Tong is the one that has been mentioned as the ask from the Padres. I think McLean is a little bit out of the price range there. Let's see here. I'm Healy Mike. Do you think Tristan McKenzie might end up being an underrated pickup? Absolutely. Any news on Marte? There was a little bit of news today as far as Bregman and Marte with the Arizona Diamondbacks. They will not be on the same team together. It's pretty much understood by the industry that if Marte goes, then that opens the door to a Bregman signing, but not before. So if Bregman does take time and get into January or February again, and Marte finally gets flipped to the Red Sox and over there to be their second baseman, that could open the door for them to bring in Bregman, but not beforehand. Let's see here. Do you think the Bellinger being a former Yankee and the loss of Pete Alonso, that means he might go to the Mets? I mean, that just seems to be the conga line that's forming going from the Yankees to the Mets, and it ain't just this year. It's been several years now. We shall see. If the Guardians couldn't get anything out of McKenzie, then nobody can. Well, you're not necessarily wrong there. I would say that the Guardians do a really good job getting the most out of their starting pitching. Every now and again, there's always a team that one team that's not able to get the most out of a certain player, and maybe they can have a little bit more success. Even though that previous team, like the Guardians or the Dodgers, is really good at developing and notifying or zeroing in some of the analytics that cause them to be great or cause them to struggle, and really developing those traits in their starting pitchers to make them even better. And McKenzie was in one of the best systems to be able to do that. Injuries, I think, really kind of hobbled him a little bit, and then the injuries result or caused poor performance, and it just kind of was a vicious cycle towards the end there with the Cleveland Guardians. Hopefully, just a new lease on life going to San Diego is exactly what the doctor ordered. Pun intended for Tristan McKenzie. Pistons got screwed over by the refs tonight. I'll put it this way: Cooper Flagg is the real deal. I'm very comfortable putting him in the top 100 players of the NBA right now. I did not think that was going to be possible before the start of the season. But the Pistons, to me, they just need a little bit more across the board. They need another ball handler. They need another, go-to scorer. They don't have much shooting. They need some more shooting. We'll see if they get some. I think they need to get it. I don't necessarily think Anthony Davis is the answer for them. But I do think they need to add some shooting on the outside. They did really well last year with having multiple shooters that they could count on. Malik Beasley, of course, we know what's going on with him, but they need more shooting there. Niebla fixed Pavetta, and he worked with McKenzie before. I do like what the Padres have been doing with some of their diamonds in the rough that they do find. Michael King really came into his own with the San Diego Padres. Was a nice pitcher before, but really came into his own with the Padres. Darvish has had his ups and downs. Musgrove, of course, really found his stride with the Padres as well. But they're going to have their work cut out for them on the injury side. That's why they need to really fulfill or give some arms into that rotation so that they really have something to go with as well. Rebuilt Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo. I mean, those are two guys that were seen as failed top prospects, I guess would be the best way to describe it. Michael Wacha had the great debut with the Cardinals and then ultimately kind of floundered, has since kind of found solid footing in the major leagues. Same goes with Seth Lugo with the Mets. Let's see here. The Yankees looking at Bo. No, they are not. I think all the reports that you hear coming around the Yankees and Bo Bichette, I think are all smoke and mirrors right now. I don't think there's any reputable source, I would say, that is even really, feigning the idea that Bo Bichette will end up as a member of the Yankees. Of course, they're going to be interested in a nice bat on the market, and I'm sure they've at least kicked the tires on it. But for them to be considered keep an eye on this team for this player in that kind of a realm, I don't view the Yankees as that for Bo Bichette. I think there are several other teams that really fit better for Bo Bichette before you get to the Yankees. Evan Grant cracks me up saying the Rangers can't afford Armstrong. No, he's wrong. See why I didn't want him. He will be good this year. Rangers got money. I will say Armstrong, I think, is one of the typical arms that you see in this market where 1 year's going to be good, 1 year's going to be bad. Armstrong was fantastic last year for the Rangers. I think if the Rangers could get him for, say, a 2-year, 3-year deal, probably a 2-year deal, I think that'd be the best case scenario. That way, I think you're guaranteeing yourself another positive year from Armstrong. Again, I always say bullpens are notoriously mercurial. 1 year's going to be good, 1 year's going to be bad. This year probably was going to be a little bit of a down year based off of how good he was last year. I think those results were hard to replicate just on the pure success he had last year. But I think he would still have a good year. I think we're probably still talking about a 3.5, ERA, maybe a 4. If he has a really bad year, maybe he gets under the 5 range. But, Armstrong was money for them, but we shall see how he does this coming season. Do you know why the market is slow? Maybe Murakami is holding it up with him having to sign by Monday. To a certain extent, I'll agree with you there. I do think the international prospects make this thing a little bit more interesting because they are the only players with a deadline to sign. There has been some discussion by former players about, hey, with the numbers we see for these international guys, they at least get their money. What if we set a date for these guys to sign, in regular free agency? That's never going to happen. The league will just kind of, it'll prop up the price for a couple of guys, but by and large, it's just going to make people lose jobs. And, we're not going to have a, closing date on free agency to be able to sign. Now, as far as Murakami holding up the market, I don't think it's necessarily him, but I do think he's a symptom of what we're seeing on the market. Something we've talked about for, probably the last 10 years now. A lot of groupthink, among major league executives, teams thinking very similarly about players, valuing them very similarly, and then the domino effect is also a part of it. At the top, you're still waiting on the teams waiting to sign Kyle Tucker. Where does he sign? Where do the teams that miss end up going? Do they go to Bellinger? Do they go to Imai? Do they go to Valdez? Lots of options out there. But now that Michael King is gone, I think we could start seeing a little bit of this logjam start to come off the board here, especially on the starting pitching side before we get to Christmas. Let's see here. I'd say Belly resigns with the Yankees. I still think he ends up with one of the two New York teams. I'd say 41-40 Mets versus Yankees, primarily because I just don't see them trusting Polanco over there at first base. I think if you're David Stearns and you truly think he's going to handle 80 games over there at first base for you, when he's handled one game over there before in his entire career, and with the knee issues he has, he's not going to be available for 162. Even if you're playing him 80 games at first base and DH the rest of the time, I think that's a miss. And obviously, where's the line of protection in there for Juan Soto? You have Lindor at the top, you have Soto in there as well, but you had Pete Alonso to at least strike some fear in the opposing pitcher. Hey, if I walk a guy like Juan Soto here, Pete Alonso puts one in the seats for me, and I'm down 2-0, and it's only the first inning. Where's that type of protection in the lineup now for Juan Soto and Lindor? Right now, those are the two bats I'm really fearing in that lineup. I do not fear Marcus Semien. I do not fear some of the rookies that are coming up. I'm sure they'll be good professionals someday, but they haven't proven it at the major league level yet. And there's more work to be done to me on the Mets starting pitching side than anything else. So if they really want a chance to solidify that the lineup first, I think Bellinger's probably their guy, but they're got to have to wait for Tucker to go, and then I think Bellinger signs. Now with Michael King off the board, I think that kind of focuses them on Framber Valdez. I saw an article today where they're focusing on a number of guys on shorter-term deals, kind of what we expected with David Stearns, and I think it's going to be a miss. If they go the one-year route with a lot of these guys out there, this is a starting rotation that's just going to find itself in hot water once again in the second half, but we shall see how this market ultimately unfolds. Will the Dodgers make a play for Stephen Kwan? Sir Centro, welcome back. Appreciate you joining us once again. I do think they will. I think we're waiting for Tucker to sign. Once he does, then I think we'll hear the Guardians talk about Stephen Kwan to the Dodgers pick up quite a bit. I do think there's a 3-team trade scenario that sends Kwan to the Dodgers and Teoscar Hernandez to the Royals, and then prospects back the other way. So we'll see where this trade, where this, offseason goes for the Dodgers. If they identify a player that they want, they usually get him. If Kwan is that guy, if Tucker is that guy, I fully expect them to be in Dodger blue on opening day. But, it's going to take a big AAV for Tucker on a shorter-term deal with lots of deferred money, in the $45-50 million range. For a trade for Kwan, you're talking about a nice blue-chip piece, probably going out in that deal. You're talking about Teoscar Hernandez to offload the salary and to give you a position there for him to be on your active roster. Frees up a little bit of the roster logjam if you were to keep him instead of trading him with Kwan's addition. So lots of moving balls this offseason. Just curious to see where these ultimately end up falling. When does Murakami sign? He will sign relatively soon. He's got to sign by the 22nd, so I would expect that deal to be announced in the next 48 hours. Do not hold your breath, though, on this taking much longer than that. I'm excited to see where he signs because, again, I think it could literally be anywhere. If there was a salary cap, people would sign right away. I do think there would be a greater impetus to try to take the free agent dollars that are offered to them when they can, but the top guys will still hold out and try to get their money. They'll still take their time, and teams will still wait for those top guys to sign. I don't think you would necessarily, force these deals with smaller players, but I think there's another way to do it rather than instituting a deadline on these signings. As far as the salary cap specifically, it's never going to happen. Players Association ain't going to let it happen. We're going to miss baseball for a year if they even try it. Let's see here. Where does Bregman go? Anybody's guess, honestly. Every time I see a team mentioned with him, they're like, oh yeah, this team is really in on him. And then the next day, the next article we get is, well, they would be interested if X, Y, and Z happened. If Marte was gone. The Tigers would be interested if they got a short-term deal. The Cubs would be interested if the average annual value was a little lower. The Boston Red Sox would be happy if they got a very similar contract offer on the table to him like they got last year. Lots of caveats with these teams. Which team is going to step out there and get him? He was fantastic for Boston in the first half of the year. Really looked like an MVP candidate for the first half of the year. Then the injury, then the poor performance after the injury as he was trying to play through the recovery process of that, and it didn't go so well. I think he's going to be fine on opening day, and so I expect him to be back to the Bregman that we saw last year. If I'm the Boston Red Sox, that's the guy I'm trying to sign from a position player standpoint, and then trying to trade for Marte. I can walk and chew gum at the same time here. Yes, they still have their toes in the water for some starting pitching and a reliever or two, but I think the Red Sox would be better off keeping Bregman rather than just going after Marte and allowing Bregman to walk in free agency. Let's see here. Where will Arenado end up, and will he be a package deal? Saw a couple of people sending him out to the Los Angeles Angels. I think that'd be an interesting sign. I don't think Arenado would really want to go there at all. He wants to be in a contention type of a situation. If he wants that, maybe Boston if they don't sign Bregman. You're talking about maybe the Phillies if they move on from Bohm, if they don't sign Murakami or Okamoto. Those would be kind of the teams I would look for. But I did see a couple of teams linked with him today. The A's and the Angels, not exactly teams that are going to be in the wild card hunt next year. What Evan Grant going to say when Rangers sign a player for over $15 to $20 million a year? He's going to say the Rangers found the money and good job on the ownership. You know why? Because he's a company man. Right now, he works for the Texas Rangers to a certain extent with the podcast that he runs with the public relations officer for the Texas Rangers in John Blake. So kind of keep that in mind as far as the information you're getting from Evan Grant. Also keep that in mind when you're talking about information you're getting from Jeff Wilson, that the sources that these guys have may or may not be as reputable as I would like them to be. I would rather trust my national reporters for some of the bigger stuff. But as far as day-to-day Texas Ranger stuff, lineup considerations, who's coming up from the minor leagues, those kinds of things, I think Jeff Wilson's got a real beat on that kind of a thing. But as far as what the Rangers are thinking as far as big money here, I do think he's got a couple of player ideas correct, or at least the archetypes of the player they're looking for correct. But I'm wondering as far as the player that they ultimately sign. So we'll see which direction they go in free agency, but I do agree that they're going to sign somebody for around that $20 million price tag for a starting pitcher, and then still have money left over for another addition, bigger addition anyway, on the position player side or in the bullpen as well. Rangers don't pay for the bullpen though, so I'd expect position player, right-handed hitter, first base, outfielder, second base, something along those lines. Okamoto's been one name that I keep hearing pretty frequently with the Rangers, not necessarily in a stronger voice now than I did a few weeks ago, but just one of the more consistent names I keep hearing around the Rangers is Okamoto, so kind of keep that name in mind if you're a Rangers fan. Locksmart, is Bregman out in Seattle because of the pitcher's park? I wouldn't necessarily say it's because of the pitcher's park. I just think that, it's Seattle. I'm not necessarily sure they'd be able to pay at the price range Bregman is wanting. That's why they're looking for their bat via trade. They have all these prospects to deal with. They can afford the contract of Brendan Donovan quite easily. Bregman's going to cost a pretty penny. They would love to improve over there at third base. They're not going to bring back the Eugenio Suarez experience for a third time. And so, keep an eye on these international free agents as a third base option. But they could go with some young guys in their own system as well. They will add one bat to this lineup. I do think Brendan Donovan will be that bat on opening day for the Mariners that they play at second base, and I think he'll be great for them. What the return will be, I think will be very enticing and very exciting for Cardinals fans. Murakami will be a Giant. I think that's a very good option, but again, where is he going to play? They're kind of locked up with big contracts on the left side of the infield. They got Eldridge over there at first base. Maybe if they sign Murakami, they play him over there at first base and send off Eldridge for bigger bat or starting pitcher or something like that. But Murakami to the Giants, I think would be less likely than to pretty much most of the other teams. But that's mainly because of the way the roster is constructed with those guys right now. Knowledge, appreciate you joining us once again. King is a good investment. I thought the Padres would look at how their big money guys choked in the playoffs versus the Cubs and would trade away the big names, average players. Well, it takes two to tango on those deals first and foremost. But King is a good investment. Really like the way this deal is really structured for the Padres. I think they gave him just enough options here to really make it worth the while of King if he does decide to play there long term. But we'll see what happens. Let's see here. We should make a top 10 biggest name but no longer a good player list. Ooh, that's a good one. So you're talking like most overpaid, bloated contracts in the game, I guess, at that point? There's a few that would really fit that description. Rendon probably be tops of that list. Until he's retired here shortly, of course. Could teams be asking too much for players in trades? That is why they're taking so long. I think these teams are all holding still on these prices until we see see if somebody else jumps in the market first. That way they know what the price is and see if they can get a bargain. I think these teams are staying pretty pat on the deals that they're offering. Once we get a little bit of movement in one trade, that trade happens, then the dominoes I think could really begin to fall. But we've been saying that for about 2 weeks now, and yet to see any real dominoes get going. Cubs have a Bregman rumor every other day. It's all about the third base for Chicago, in my opinion. If Suarez is the cheapest at third base, he's a Cub. If third base Murakami is the cheapest, he's a Cub. I could see both Suarez and Murakami going to the Cubs. Not both of them together, but I mean one of those guys ending up there. Bregman is their top target, but I just don't think he's going to settle for the average annual value they're going to offer. I think he's going to get a better offer from another club with a higher average annual salary, and he may be more comfortable doing, again, betting on himself after an injury filled and struggled in the second half last year. If he puts up a full season of what he did in the first half, we're talking a 6-year guarantee, 7-year guarantee, over $200 million for sure at that point, which is what he's been looking for all along. When does Okamoto have to sign by? I'm not sure of the exact date, but it is after Murakami, but not by much. I think it's within the next week or so thereafter. Right around New Year's, I think, is when it's expected to be done. Paying Nico Horner an extension and just keeping Shaw at third base is also an option. Very true. But I think the Cubs are looking to improve both in the rotation and in their lineup, and I think the best way to do so would be to utilize the positions that they could use an upgrade while still not mortgaging their future. They have really good options in their outfield right now with the young guys. Getting those guys playing time would be important, and if they added a bat, I don't think they want to block those guys in the outfield. So that means probably the infield, and then they could probably move on from an Ian Happ or a Nico Horn or something along those lines via trade. But those would be the avenues I'd be looking if I was a Cubs fan. Let's see here. As much as I love our beat writers, I don't think they have a great inside sources either. They downplay the money so much, but I don't think that's entirely accurate. Could not agree with you more there, Tato. I do think the Rangers have more money than anybody's really talking about. They have $30 to $40 million by my math that they could spend and still save off of what they were spending last season. That's a lot of money. That's plenty of money to go out there and get a guy like Michael King at that price point. I don't think their interest in Michael King was nearly as strong as it was in, say, a guy like Dylan Cease. But I think Zach Gallen, if this is the number for Michael King, and he's viewed as a little bit better pitcher right now, Gallen may have a higher ceiling, but Gallen's coming off of a down year. If they can get if the Rangers could get Zach Gallen on a 3-year deal, because of the three-year deal that King just got with opt-outs after the first and second year, maybe they offer him a 3-year deal with a player option for the 4th year at $22 million. I would be happy with that if I was a Ranger fan. That gets you another long-term starter in there to go along with DeGrom, Eovaldi, Leiter, Rocker, Latz, and others that you're hoping to rely on this upcoming season as well. Let's see here. Murakami has until the 22nd to sign. Yes, he does, Johnny. We were talking about that earlier. Okamoto and Imai are shortly thereafter. Cubs had a sneaky good signing, in my opinion. Tyler Austin has been really good in Japan. If you like Mike Tauchman, same situation. I really like the player Mike Tauchman. I think he's kind of really turned himself into a consummate professional and kind of figured out some of his holes in his swing. Now, is he going to be an MVP one day? No, but he's certainly going to be at the very worst, a platoon player. And, probably the upside or the best you can hope for from Michael Tauchman is somebody who could lead off for you or hit up in the lineup when you have some of your stars out and still be able to hold down the fort until those guys get back. If you're counting on him to be a middle of the order bat for you, I think you're asking too much. But Tauchman has been a really nice player the last few years here, and excited to see. I think there's an outside chance he's one of the names that we see moved this off season, or at least ends up in a nice situation that we're not expecting as well. Do you think Tyler Austin will be a good returning to MLB after spending years in the NBP or NPB? I'll put it this way: if he's an all-star, I would be floored at any point in his career. If he's it doesn't take much to be an improvement off of where he was. Not to kind of slight what he was before, but it wasn't a player that was getting any type of a lucrative deal anywhere. Not a difference-making player, certainly. By that math, if you're asking me if he's going to be a difference maker, I would say no. I think best case scenario you're hoping for with Austin is a marginal impact for a couple of months at best. Let's see here. Sir Centro is Zaire and Josue De Paula anyway. Hoping that the Dodgers would trade for a top pitcher. And do you see Alex Freeland being the future third baseman after Muncy? I think they're going to go free agency for a third baseman long term. Um, Curious to see who they go for. As far as the Zaire Hope and DePaula for the Dodgers, are they hoping they trade for a top pitcher? If I'm those two prospects, I would want to stay in that Dodger system as long as I can because that's where I really can continue to learn. They've done a great job developing talent. Now, as far as trading that talent away, that talent usually hasn't worked out too well for the acquiring club. So buyer beware. Now, if they were to come up with the Dodgers, of course they'll hit and become some of the best players we've ever seen. That's just the way it seems to work out for the Dodgers. But I think those two prospects you mentioned there are still, they might be the two guys that would be immune to the struggles other top prospects in the Dodgers have had that have been traded away. I think both of those players are A pluses. If you're specifically talking about that type of prospect, you're talking about a big time trade. We're talking, Quan plus a top end reliever. We're talking, Tarek Skubal, that level of trade. And I don't think the Dodgers are going to do something like that this offseason. I don't think they're comfortable trading that level of prospect package to be able to get a deal done. But as far as Freeland, the future at third base, I would expect a free agent rather than Freeland. Okamoto to Rangers would be interesting. I think that one is the name, like I said, that I keep hearing even more so than Luis Rise. I think it's the fans that are pushing for Luis Rise more than anything else, just kind of connecting the dots about the time in Miami and the contact rates that the Rangers are looking for this coming season. I think he'd be a great fit, but I think there are other free agents that fit better, like Bellinger, even though he's a bigger cost. I think he fits better than Luis Rise, gives you the power numbers that you're still looking for, in addition to the on-base and contact rates and the lower strikeout rate and the higher walks, all those kinds of things. He's a better version of what Luis Rise is by a mile. Now, Luis Rise is still a good player, but I think Okamoto would be the preference because the multi-positional abilities he brings to any club he's going to go to. So we'll see where he lands. I think the Rangers have been one of the more frequent teams I've heard on him, so I would not be surprised to see that deal get done fairly soon either. You think Rendon should give half of his contract back to the Angels? What a disgrace. It's a guaranteed contract for a reason, my friend. He was seen as a really high caliber third baseman when he signed the deal. It's on the Angels for not vetting out the player, not getting the love of the game type of thing. We've seen that over and over and over again with the Angels investing bad in free agency. Pujols just kind of wore down over time. It's a first base contract. We knew it was going to wear down over time. You look at the Soler trade that they made a couple of years ago. Why did they make that deal? I mean, he's completely blocked from playing DH. It's part of why Trout and Soler both got injured last year because they both needed to be a DH and they were forced to play the field, which caused some of their injury issues to begin. You also look at the Josh Hamilton deal, ended up cutting him and allowing him to play for the Rangers while you're still paying him an ungodly amount of money. And he was able to resurrect himself almost immediately when he got back to Texas. Things have not worked out well for the Angels, and Rendon, probably the worst of all those deals. Agree on Bregman. I like the Japanese third base, but Cubs, in my opinion, sign Suarez and starting pitcher Imai and then hand out one-year deals. I think pie in the sky, Imai is kind of the one guy that would be the most difference-making move for the Cubs, I think, this offseason. If they were somehow able to do Imai and Bregman, that might force me to reevaluate my calculus on where the Cubs could finish this season. I doubt they get both of those guys. Honestly, I doubt they get either of those guys. I think you're looking more likely at Okamoto, Murakami, Suarez, Bohm, that type of player. Nolan Arenado comes to mind as well. One-year deals, of course, to kind of round out that rotation we've talked about ad nauseum. Verlander, Molly, players along those lines. Andrew, is there a trade that happens that no one can see or will see coming? Of course there will be. We've speculated on and off again several times throughout the last couple of weeks about certain trades that we could see. Corey Seager obviously not happening anyway, but there's always going to be some trade talk that evades even the best insiders out there. The Rangers, we talked about how their beat reporters are just kind of completely clueless in some respects to how the Rangers move in silence. I think nobody was really expecting the Rangers to really outbid everybody for Jacob deGrom. Nobody was expecting them to end up with Corey Seager. They said, oh, we brought in Chris Woodward, and oh yeah, we'll make a token run at Corey Seager. No, they were going to add one of those shortstops that offseason, one of the 5 best shortstops in the class. Nobody thought it would be the best of that group in Corey Seager, but they were able to get it done. Big names, average players list, Stanton, New York, Manny Machado, Tatis Jr. Tatis Jr. is not an average player. Tatis Jr. is a plus player to me. His ability in the outfield has certainly turned into a plus player defensively out there. The bat still plays. Is it as good as you would hope for? No, but he's certainly a difference maker when he wants to be, I guess is the best way to put it. Manning at the plate still posts, and the field he still plays very well, but not necessarily up to the value of the player, or value of the contract anyway. Not an average player. I'd say he's a good player, a very well compensated good player at this point in his career, but he is one of the more clutch players that I've seen in the game. I think he can elevate when those moments arise, and if the Padres are going to do anything in October, he's going to be part of that group that's going to be counted on to come through in those clutch moments. Put Sandy Alcantara on the big name average player list, though. He does have plus stuff. I think he's a below average player at this point to me until he proves he can get back to the Cy Young level. I think he's got it in him. I think he will get there if he's with the right coaching staff. We shall see. And then, of course, Anthony Rendon, Trevor Story. I put him on that list. Michael, I'm going to tag you. We got something interesting for you to look at. I'll look at it here in just a little bit. Anyway, I've got a long day tomorrow, unfortunately. I got quite a shift, so we're going to try to catch up on a few of these other stories here in just a moment, and then kind of go from there. See here. Lucas, welcome back. Appreciate you joining us once again. Jeff, welcome in. What do you think about the report about Corey Seager and Semien had differences? I did see that report come out today anyway. John Heyman kind of late to the arrival of the tension in the Rangers clubhouse, I guess is the best way he was trying to phrase it. The differences of opinion on how to go about team building and those kind of exercises. Kevin Pillar, when he left the Rangers last year, kind of raised that sentiment as well. How things were done a little bit differently, a little bit more unorthodox than other ball clubs. And to a certain extent, I do agree with Marcus Semien that, going out and get-togethers and, not necessarily doing trust falls or anything like that, but just being around each other, building that team camaraderie really does have a galvanizing force when you're struggling. Say you're down 5-0 entering the 6th inning, and you're just completely being dominated on the mound by the opposing pitcher. That camaraderie, that or the lack thereof, the silence that you see in the clubhouse or in that dugout, can really be amplified if you're not as close-knit of a clubhouse. If you're struggling against that starting pitcher, how about we work on that communication? How about we work on, hey, what's worked in your at-bat? What are you seeing that that I'm struggling with? And just kind of build on that. It's not all on the hitting coach to make things work for you. Now, specifically here with Semien and Seager, Seager just kind of was more, not necessarily aloof, but just wanted to do his own thing, kind of quiet, lead by example kind of a guy. I'll work, all that kind of thing. Semien was also a lead by example guy, but he was also a little bit more vocal. He wanted to do the get-togethers, and Seager wasn't necessarily about that kind of a thing. Not that he didn't appreciate the effort that Semien was trying to put in this team, but just two very different ways of going about team building, about taking care of business, and I think that's more of the differences. That's more of the differences that you're going to see, or that we were talking about anyway, that Heyman was bringing up as well. All right, I forgot the Phillies traded Luzardo last year. No one saw that coming. That's why I was asking. I do think we're going to see quite a few of the trades that we are expecting. Now, as far as trades that we're not expecting to see, I do think the Rangers are going to do something out of left field, just the way their positions or their players are kind of lined up. Same thing with the Mets. I think we all know the names that they could deal from, but I think where they go could be a little bit interesting there. You did find our X. Good job on you. Appreciate you. Knowledge. The Cubs' goals, though, would be to spend big on Imai, then play the market, get Suarez at third base. But I think that's their plan, which is not bad. You can't lose out if the kid is Yamamoto 2.0. I do think he's a very good pitcher. I think he's a pitcher close to the Yamamoto class, but kind of a half step below. I don't think he's going to get the 10-year deal, or anything like that. But I do think Imai was looking for something in the range of what Dylan Cease got. I think that's a little bit rich. I think at best he might get a 5 or 6 year deal from somebody. But I think that contract will surprise us one direction or the other when he does actually get it done. Cubs want to trade Nico Horner, Gold Glove, good bat, 1 year, $10 million, play shot, second base. I don't like it. I'd rather keep Ian Happ, Gold Glove, and his 1 year, 20. I think the Cubs are in a really good spot no matter what they do. They have options at all these places. You talk about trying to develop a team or trying to build a team. If you already have decent options at all these positions there, then you look for the best opportunity to improve your roster, which is where you want to be if you're the Cubs. They've done a nice job of that. But again, I think they'd been better off not trading for Kyle Tucker last year. Then they'd have even more options at their disposal. And then, of course, as far as the money goes, it's going to be interesting to see how they decide to disperse it. To me, the starting pitching has got to be the priority. Thought that last year, though, but they kept telling me, no, it's offense. We need to make the trade for Kyle Tucker because we don't have enough offense. And lo and behold, the pitching was the problem, like we knew all along. I don't know. I didn't think anything else happens tonight. Why is there no news on Fairbanks? I think it's, as far as the relief market goes, I think it's just random. It's purely random. Once a team decides to jump up their offer by $500,000, maybe $1 million to a certain reliever or two, then we might get some activity. I think Fairbanks is very much susceptible to that, and it's just a matter of time before a team decides to jump here. Once these relievers start to come off the board, you're going to see them start to come off in rather quick fashion. You'll see probably one or two in the first couple days. You'll see three or four the next couple days thereafter, and then you'll see five or six, and then kind of peter back down again. Sir Century, do you believe Justin Dean will be a solid player in the future for the Giants, and will the Dodgers miss out on not protecting him? Solid player, possibly. Counting on it to be a solid player, no. Mets are 100% trading for a number one pitcher. That seemed to be the route they're going. If I had to guess, Freddie Peralta. I mean, going the Mets connection, the Brewers connection. I mean, it's too palpable for me, especially with the way the industry is now expecting Peralta to be traded. And the pitching prospects that the Mets do offer would be very enticing to a team like the Brewers, who are always looking to kind of reset their salary structure. So I would expect that to be one of the most enticing moves that we see relatively soon for the Mets. For me, though, I would still go the free agency route. I'd bring in Framber Valdez. I would have tried to bring in Michael King. That's not going to happen. Trade route, I'd try to pry away Lopez or Ryan from the Minnesota Twins. In lieu of that, you're probably going to be left with a bunch of one-year guys, and I don't think that gets the job done. I think there's going to be a Garrett Crochet contract, or he's going to get the Garrett Crochet contract. I could see that for Imai, a very similar deal, yeah. Maybe even bigger, actually. Do you think big market teams are going to miss on Murakami while they wait for the Dominoes as likely to sign with a smaller market team, maybe the Pirates or Twins, just to get a U.S. contract? The desperation, I think, that's been played out in the national media over the last couple days about Murakami, as far as he might have to settle for a lesser deal, I think is completely way overblown. I think he will still do very well in free agency. I think he just isn't posting it on social media. Nobody's posting pictures of him landing at an airport taking visits. I think he's allowing his agent to get the best deal for him, and there is a decent chance he could end up on a team like the Pirates or Twins. But I don't think that's necessarily at the expense of the bigger markets waiting for something even bigger. Now, there might be, like the Blue Jays, I don't think are necessarily in on those guys. I think they had interest in Imai before they signed Dylan Cease, but I think their focus right now is solely on Kyle Tucker. All right, let me head over to X and just see if anything else is happening at the moment. Doesn't look like too much is happening there. Let's check out our notifications. That was a great game, by the way. The Mavericks go into overtime. Possibly a game of the year in the NFL today. Seahawks and Rams, just a great game. That's the last play right there, the two-point conversion. Just crazy how they were able to pull that off. I was this close to pulling the trigger on that final drive for the Seahawks because I thought there was a good chance they could get the ball rolling on the Rams, and they did. Good on them for getting it done. Let's see here. Andrew, could the Phillies be waiting on Imai's decision before Suarez is coming back? Possibly. I wouldn't rule that out. But again, the finalists are expected to be the Yankees and Cubs. However, this finalist list, as opposed to the Michael King one, we know that there are other teams still on the periphery of that discussion. I would guess the Phillies are in that discussion. I would guess the Braves are in that discussion. I would guess the Red Sox are still, circling here. I would expect the Rangers are still in discussions there as well. But as far as Imai, I think Yankees, I think the Orioles probably kick the tires on it as well. But I would guess probably the Yankees or Cubs for him most likely. Hear me out, Joe Burrow to the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, if I'm Minnesota, I say yes, and how many first-rounders? Take them, and I want Joe Burrow. But I also want to make sure I bring back Brian Flores because that defense needs to be legit. If they don't bring him back and they end up being the Cincinnati Bengals 2.0, could get real bad there. But I do think that the Vikings will add a starting quarterback this offseason. Reports have already connected Daniel Jones to the Minnesota Vikings. not exactly the most thrilling quarterback, especially with the injury risk, but we'll see. Jets got 5 first, but trading that for Burrow does nothing. I don't think they would trade for Burrow. I think they've got some options for quarterback this year in the draft and kind of go from there. What I tagged you in is important. It's about a player getting posted this year. Um, I see the follow. I don't see any tags though. Granted, I'm not exactly the most proficient guy at X posting or anything like that. I just don't see a tag on here, unfortunately. I'll check it out though. I'm heel. I'll look. I'll see if I can find it anyway. All right, let's head over to MLB trade rumors just to double check one more thing. Until he signs, I'm still holding out hope that he might to the Phillies. I mean, I get the interest in Imai. I think Imai very well could be a better pitcher, and I think he will be a better pitcher than Ranger Suarez. I just wonder about the ability in the postseason. For me, I mean, the ability in the postseason's got to be paramount right now for the Phillies. The goal is to win in October. It's not to win in, July and August. And while Imai might be the better pitcher long term and might end up being the better pitcher in the postseason, I have a proven postseason performer who posts every day, who's been up and down in that rotation, welcome or is able to come out of the bullpen in a postseason game as well. I just think that he's too valuable for the way the Phillies have utilized him. Now, if you're telling me that they signed both of those guys, fantastic offseason for the Phillies. No matter what else happens, they would probably have one of the best off seasons in the entire sport, in my opinion. They're not getting both. And so if I have to pick between those two, just because of the postseason factor alone, I would lean Ranger Suarez. Now, like I said, Imai might be the better pitcher, but I'm still going to go with the guy I know can perform in October, and that's why I would prefer keeping Suarez rather than going after a quote unquote unknown, certain type of unknown anyway, in Imai. All right, Jordan Tyson next to Neighbors is going to be elite. Giants will trade back a few spots. I mean, for me, if I'm a general manager of a team in any type of a draft, trading down would be my priority almost every single year. I don't care what the draft class is, because if I can get a future first and by moving down, say 10 spots in a draft, if I'm at the top of the first round, you could easily do that if you have one of the top 5 picks in any sports draft. But to get those first round picks is incredibly valuable. Now, you still get the first round pick that year. You're not going to have a blue chipper or at least that level of blue chipper that you would have had before the trade. But you're still going to build up your roster and continue to have that level of success. And if you decide to package some of those picks together, once you are competitive for a difference making piece like a Miles Garrett or something big like a Joe Burrow, if you still haven't been able to figure out the quarterback at that point and you still have all these future assets, then that'd be great. But for me, I would always look to be trading down. I would almost never ever trade up, especially in the first round, unless there was some big time piece that I thought was the difference making piece, just like a Miles Garrett. Now, as far as the lower rounds, I don't mind trading up in rounds 2 through 7 in the NFL draft because those trades are less consequential. And if you identify a player you think could be special in those rounds, by all means, go out there and get it done. Lower round draft picks are not nearly the value of what first rounders are. Let's see here. Now look, I had to do it that way. I can take a look again. Let me see. Nothing in my notifications. I've never done X chat. No, thank you. Let me try this one more time. Jackson Holiday, not untouchable. Orioles fan shouldn't pretend that he is. Blah 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 blah. Michael King is off the board. Yes. Go get Suarez or Valdez. Obviously Framber. I don't see a notification still. Sorry, my friend. Let's see here. Lucas, do you think Mac Jones will get a chance after his starting tenure in San Francisco? I would say look to, again, the Minnesota Vikings. San Francisco to Minnesota train is running once again this offseason, I do believe. But I do think Mac Jones has a chance to sign somewhere and be a starter. I think he looked very good at times in Jacksonville. He looked much better with more coaching, more quality coaching from the San Francisco 49ers. So we'll see what happens there. Sir Centra from this pool of talent. Jackson Ferris, River Ryan, Justin, I'm going to just say Justin W. I always struggle with that name. Gavin Stone and Ebbett Sheehan. Who would you want to see as a superstar pitcher? Which would you see as a superstar pitcher, and which would you not trade? So basically, which guy do I identify in that or out of those guys there that I would be most wanting to keep? Ferris, probably. Probably Jackson Ferris. I don't necessarily see any of those guys being a superstar, but he would be the one that I would prefer to hold on to out of all those other names. There's no more excuses for Josh Allen. There's no Chiefs in his way this year. Kind of my thought as well, but that Bills team is not nearly as good as they've been in years past. They have their issues on offense, especially at the wideout spot with poor performance from time to time. And then, of course, their defense can, turn into Swiss cheese overnight. So there's no elite team this year in the NFL, period. The National Spin Machine is Eastern bias, so the possibility of King re-signing with the Padres will now trade for a pitcher with contractual control. I do think they will go for contractual control as well, Tom. Their National Spin does generally, have an East Coast bias. I will agree there, with the ESPN being based on the East Coast. But I don't think it was necessarily an East Coast driven thing. I think there was legitimate heat to the the three teams that were mentioned. There's too many insiders mentioning that as well, and for them to be able to keep him and be able to get him at the price that they did, I think that's more indicative of the groupthink, the lack of inspired offers that teams are offering to these players. They were talking about it a little bit on Foul Territory the other day about collusion and how teams seem to, offer very similar, if not the exact same contracts to players at almost the exact same time. You know why they do that? It's not necessarily collusion. It's because they all think the same damn way. I mean, they plug in these numbers basically into a computer. This is what the contract should look like. So you try to start out low and try to work up to that contract. If you get to that contract level, then you just say, sorry, we can't sign that player. Not worth it in our system. Doesn't work with our calculus. Moving on to the next option. But we'll wait for that price to get done. So that price, we know what that is on the market. We can reconfigure everything for the next guy that signs. And that's also why it takes a little bit of time for these guys further down the list to sign. But as far as King going back to the Padres, love the signing for the Padres. If you guys are joining us right now for the first time, be sure to hit that like and subscribe. Got about 37 of you guys in here right now. Let me see how many likes I can see on here. Shows 17, so if you guys haven't hit that like button already, please do so. Goes a long way to helping us out. We'll be live every single evening between 9 and 11 o'clock. Depending on what day it is, we'll start between 9 and 11 and go for about an hour, sometimes two, depending on how things work out during the week. But we try to keep you guys updated throughout the entire week on what's happening on the hot stove. On the weekends, we try to do a video or two as well. We'll try to touch on other sports as well. But be sure to hit that like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook as well, Upside Sports Network. Cowboys are 2 years away from trading Dak. I thought they should have traded Dak before, but, that opportunity's come and gone. King's a good keep. Absolutely, BB. Welcome in. Appreciate you joining us. First time I think I've seen you in our chat, but appreciate you joining us this evening. I'm thinking the Orioles pivot to Gallen. Again, that's the name I think is next in line after King for that kind of a type or that level of pitcher. Ryan O'Hearn, I'd get. If you're the Padres to kind of fill up or kind of continue the growth there for San Diego, I think that'd be a nice option. But I think he's going to be a little rich. Saw a couple of projections out there that he's going to get 2 years, $22 million. That's a little rich for the Padres' blood at this point, unless they're getting starting pitching. I don't see them doing a $10 million DH, first base, corner outfield option at times, that type of a player. I would say Ryan O'Hearn does fit. I've seen quite a few articles connecting him to the Cincinnati Reds. I believe that. I think the Pittsburgh Pirates, again, nice fit there. I would say going back to the Royals at some point, I think would be a decent option. But I think there are other teams that really fit him a little bit better than the Royals. But I think he'll still do very well. 2 for 20 sounds about right. But offense is a premium nowadays. Pitching is kind of taken over in some areas. Offense has in certain other respects. Shorter appearance or shorter starts in general by starting pitchers these days, and just having to need so many arms in the back end. But then you look at how few teams have an elite offense. You look at the Rangers, who just had a great offense in the World Series a couple years ago, and were one of the worst offenses each of the last 2 years. So we'll see what happens for him. You'd give him 13. I mean, that's a little bit higher than what I think, but that's usually the way contracts work as well. The way I price him out is 2 for 22 is probably what he should get. The market usually indicates that he's going to get a little bit more. It's just the way sometimes those things work out for some of the bigger names. Gallen getting same $25 million a year. Remember, it's 22 the first year. I think it goes up to 24 in the second year, and then if he plays all 3 seasons, it's 25 per. Essentially, is the average annual value. I think it's 28 million he gets in the second year if everything works out that way. 30 million in the last year, but it equates essentially to a 3 for 75 deal, 25 per if he stays the entire time in San Diego. Your boy Ozuna to Pittsburgh would be the move. Yeah, I think it'd be a decent option there, kind of a Adolis Garcia replacement, if you will. To me, I thought Ozuna would been or Adolis Garcia had been a great Pittsburgh Pirate, somebody that they could have really flourished with, but they weren't one of the 2 finalists for him. It sounds like it was between the Royals and Phillies, and he chose to go to the more competitive team. I think Ozuna going pretty much anywhere he can get a guaranteed contract at this point is where he's going to have to go. And Pittsburgh, being that desperate on offense, would be the choice there. You'd put O'Hearn over at first. If I were to sign him in San Diego, that's probably where I'd put him as well. But I would argue that the money for O'Hearn anyway is too rich, especially when you consider that their need is on the starting pitching side. They still need at least 2 to 3 more starting pitchers before I'm comfortable saying their starting pitching is at least in good hands on opening day. Where do you think Cabrera from the Marlins will go when he gets traded? I still think he's going to get traded fairly quickly here. I'd expect before New Year's. If I were to name like 5 or 6 teams where he could go, because I don't think there's necessarily a favorite at this point. I would say the Rangers, I would say the Cubs, I'd say the Yankees, because they've been connected to him for basically 3 years now. I'd say teams that are looking for long-term controllable starting pitching. Cardinals, I don't necessarily think are looking to compete this year, but I think if they can get a starting pitcher like that, and they've been connected to him as well, I think it'd be a really good option for the Cardinals there. I would say the Atlanta Braves, but in the division, I think it might be a little tough there. And the Mets have also kicked the tires there, but again, in the division. So I think Cabrera is going to be dealt. It's just a matter of when. But if I had to guess, Cubs, Rangers, probably the 2 most likely teams. If the Rangers don't sign somebody in free agency, I would expect the Rangers to be the one that lands Cabrera. So we'll see where he goes. If I'm Pitt, no way. Again, I just don't want Osuna. So it's the only reason why it would make sense to me if I were Pitt is if that the need for offense is just that desperate. But again, I can do better. Tom, the Mets clubhouse dysfunction continues to distort the free agent market. To a certain degree, I'll agree with you there. With Pete Alonso taking the free agent dollars from the Orioles really was probably the weirdest signing of the offseason for me. But then losing Edwin Diaz and deciding to bring in Devin Williams and Luke Weaver. And how it happened, I think, is the weirdest part of all that. I thought there was a chance that could happen, obviously. Dodgers want to improve their bullpen. He's the best closer in the game. Bring him in. Makes some sense. But how that whole thing happened, how he still wanted to go back to the Mets, when they made the signing of Devin Williams, they didn't at least give him a, hey, by the way, we're going to look for him to be our 8th inning option, so don't be surprised when you see him sign with us. Ignore those articles that are going to say he's taken over in the 9th inning because we don't want to pay you. But instead of doing that, instead of being, thinking ahead and with a forethought that, hey, maybe I should at least, identify or at least call the player that I want to bring back most of all in our bullpen and say, hey, just FYI, we still want you back. I think that would have been a big indicator for Edwin Diaz that he was still valued in that organization. And I think that just how it was handled was done poorly, more like what a rookie GM would be doing. And unfortunately for the Mets, the guy handling these things ain't a rookie, and he's making some rookie mistakes that I'm seeing, at least from the outside looking in. Now, of course, he's one of those, new wave of GMs where, they like to save a little bit of money here and there. They don't like to go out there and spend big money things. That's why the Juan Soto thing was an ownership level thing. And I think David Stearns has basically been given carte blanche to build the rest of the roster how he sees fit. Let's see here. Yeah, probably fit with Houston. O'Hearn, they already have a glut of first base options. They're looking to trade Christian Walker. Now, if you're talking about outfield, I could see that. But, I think the Astros are even more limited on budget right now than we think. I think they'll probably, if they can get off of Walker's money, I think that would be their best case scenario. I wouldn't do it. I think Walker just had a bad year last year. I think he'll get right back to where he was this past season. But we'll see how things ultimately work out. Offensively, Osuna is way better than Adolis, period, case closed. I would say Adolis Garcia at his best is way better than Ozuna is at his best. The swing and miss is there for both of them. I would say Ozuna has had more highs than Adolis Garcia, but I'd say Adolis Garcia has had bigger highs than a Marcell Ozuna. And I think with him going into a environment where he's going to not have the pressure that he did um, on him when he was in Texas to kind of carry the load offensively and with the power. He's going to have Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber and Trey Turner, all these other bats in that lineup to really allow him to, get his swing right and not have to chase pitches. And I think that'll be the biggest improvement for him. If he can just work on those two things alone, we're probably getting him back up to a 260, 270 batting average at best. And then probably, 30, 35, 40 home runs in that ballpark. I think that's very easily attainable for Adolis Garcia. But he has that kind of power, especially if he's able to stay healthy. And the defense is obviously way better than Marcell Ozuna. Will the Royals trade Cole Ragans? I don't think so. That was part of the reason why Duran did not get traded from the Boston Red Sox. There was interest, obviously, between the two clubs, with Duran going one way, Ragans going the other. But the Royals were absolutely uh, steadfast in their resolve about not even allowing Reagan to be involved in those talks, and that's why the Duran talks to the Royals ultimately fizzled out. Noe Ozuna is overrated. I think he's properly rated by me, but I think the industry does overvalue him a little bit, but that's what they do with power. They look at the back of the baseball card and say, hey, this guy was good in 21 and 23, and so therefore I think he has a chance to be good in 26. That's not usually how that works. Once a player starts declining rapidly, i.e. Marcus Semien, I don't see that free fall really stopping. Takashi will be posted. Kona Takahashi might be posted. That's why I'm trying to tell you, Michael, but X won't let me. He's a pitcher. Kona Takahashi, you say. Kona Takahashi. Let's look at baseball reference shall we? 97, so he is, 28? A little bit older pitcher. Not, to me, Yamamoto, obviously. Yamamoto being younger when he came over. Get rid of all these freaking ads. 28 last year, 3 ERA, not quite in Imai's category to me, at least so far from the numbers I'm seeing. 1.2 whip, whereas Imai, I think, had a .89 whip. Hits are a little higher than Imai as well. I think Imai is around 5. This guy's around 8, a full 3 hits higher per 9. Strikeouts are way lower, and that's in a league that doesn't strike out a whole lot of guys. So what's he going to do when he comes over would be question marks for me. But as far as the pitcher, could he be the next Sugano? Possibly. Sugano, to me, doesn't really move the needle here. He's a decent pitcher, don't get me wrong, but you look at the numbers from 24, 7 games, he had a 2.73 ERA with one during one stretch. Then you look at his 23 and 22 seasons at 2.2 ERA. That's a little better. Strikeout rate was in the 7s. This was his lowest strikeout rate since 2018. So a little bit of a down year. Maybe if he reestablishes value in 26, I could see that argument a little bit better. So I hope that kind of answers your question there as far as what I think about the player. I'm Heel, but I think he's a good option, but I don't necessarily think he's a difference-making option either, at least at this point. Could Seattle trade for Nolan Arenado? Possibly. I think that would be a nice option for them, a low-cost option. Maybe even do a 2-for-1 double dip there, Donovan and Nolan Arenado. It's said that they're looking to bring in one bat this offseason. That's why I think maybe a 2-for-1 from the Cardinals might make it a little tougher there. Again, you don't want to pollute the asset of Brendan Donovan by attaching a negative asset like Arenado to it, which also is another reason why I don't think Necessarily 2-for-1 would make a lot of sense, but the fit is there. If they can't come to a deal on Brendan Donovan, the groundwork is already laid. The names of which players you're interested in with each club have already been exchanged, so a deal could come together fairly quickly if they don't land Brendan Donovan. Just continue with was it Cole Young over there at second base. Will Chase Utley make the Hall of Fame, and should Dale Murphy and Gary Sheffield be in the Hall of Fame? Chase Utley, I think he'll probably get in. Um, I don't think he necessarily should, but I was never much of a Chase Utley guy. But if Kent is in for the power numbers at second base, I think Utley is just as good as far as a player as Jeff Kent. And I thought Jeff Kent was a borderline Hall of Famer. The power numbers at second base were the most compelling argument I kept hearing over the years for Jeff Kent, and that wasn't necessarily selling me, but I could at least hear the argument. Now, as far as Dale Murphy, he should have been in the Hall of Fame, period. End of story. Gary Sheffield, to me, he kind of fits in that same mold with the Roger Clemens of the world, Barry Bonds of the world, all that kind of thing as far as the PED argument. One of the most feared hitters ever in the game. I think he should be remembered like that. Is he one of the top 1% of the 1%? As far as the ability to put bat on ball, I think he's in that category. As far as an overall player, with the PED era, all that included, I mean, it's right there. I mean, it's 51 one day, 49 the next, whether he should or shouldn't be in the Hall. And for me, if you're on that borderline, usually I lean towards no, just because I'm not necessarily a small Hall guy, but I'm not a large Hall guy either. I want the guys who should be in there to be in there, and I'm tired of this hem and hawing about the PED era. Get it over with. Stop arguing about these PED guys, and let these guys like Dale Murphy, who should have gotten in when they were on the writers' ballot, and allow them to get in. Allow these center fielders who weren't given a second chance on the ballot, like Kenny Lofton or Bernie Williams or Jim Edmonds or any of these players that weren't really given a real shake out there in center field, another chance, another bite at the apple. So, allow those guys to get in, be done with it, and get it over with. Stop talking about PEDs because, again, these guys deserve their due, not just the PED guys as well. When will the Pirates win the series? They're not. Sorry, Pirates fans, you're just not. Love you, but I enjoy watching Paul Skeens, and I like having the way the stadium really lights up once you get to October. But this is a team, even if you make all the right moves, on its best day, ain't winning the series. At least the way it's currently structured with ownership. Now, if you're telling me ownership changes and they're willing to spend a little bit more money consistently, or there's a CBA negotiation change that forces them to change, then I'll buy it, but not until then. If the Royals are smart, they would trade Ragans to the Yankees for Jazz, Spencer Jones, and Jason Dominguez. Not going to happen, but I like the thought there. Jones would take over for Lane next year, outfield of Dominguez, Jones, and Jace. I mean, if the Royals were to get that for Cole Ragans, that would be fantastic. But the Royals aren't interested in trading Ragans. I don't think the Yankees would give up that package for Ragans. I think they'd rather go the free agent route there, period. Tom, Polanco made no sense to the Mets. Kind of one of the other most mystifying signings was that whole Alonso signing and the fallout with the Mets. Neither one of those deals really made sense to me. Now, if there's a following move that, Brett Beatty's included for a trade for a starting pitcher, or Vientos, or one of these other consistent, pieces in the lineup, McNeil as well, then I could see it making a little bit more sense as the versatility of Polanco would then come into play there. But at a certain point, you got to realize the guy's played one game ever at first base. I think it was even one inning, and you had Pete Alonso. You had the defensive issues with him, but he could still pick it with the best of them over there at first base. Polanco's never really done it. So what does that say about his defense? I'm sure his defense is valuable for second, third, short, having the multi-positional flexibility. But what about specifically handling first base for 80 games, which is what the front office basically indicated was their plan right now? I think it's a little bit of a miss, especially when you consider part of your issues was the defense of a guy like Pete Alonso. All right, Ethan, Osuna, 270 average, career 340 on base. Adolis, 290 on base, 230 average. I'm just saying that Adolis, his peaks have been higher. Now, as far as overall career, yes, Osuna's numbers, I do agree with you. They are better. But I think at this point in their career, Adolis has so much more left in the tank than Osuna does, period. I mean, Osuna to me is, I wouldn't say completely washed. I still think he probably has one more decent season left. but I certainly don't think he has a 320 season left in him. I don't think he's going to have another 30 home run season in him. I don't even think he's got a 25 home run season in him at this point in his career. I don't think he'll play enough games in any or with whoever he ends up signing with this offseason to even get into the 22-23 category. He might just barely break 20, but Adolis Garcia, I would bank on him hitting at least 25 home runs this year with the Philadelphia Phillies. Next year, if he really corrects everything with the Philadelphia Phillies, if the Phillies re-sign him, we could see him hitting 30 home runs each of the next 3 years there in Philadelphia. I'm just saying Adolis has more left in him, and I would rather have Adolis than Ozuna at this point in their careers. And yes, I'm aware both guys are off of a little bit of a down year, especially Adolis Garcia with the offensive numbers. But again, change of scenery I think is a little bit important here. Where he landed is even more important, and the coaching and managing he's going to be able to get there in Philadelphia. And of course, the lineup itself I think lends itself to protect Adolis in that lineup and allow him to come along and improve at his own rate as well. All right, try to wrap up a few of these comments before we head out for the evening. Where does Bader go? Nothing on him lately. Not too much. Last team I heard was the Royals, but they have signed or at least acquired two outfielders since, one via trade and one signing. Let's see here. I predict Bader going to the Angels. I think that'd be a good fit out there in center field. I think they'd have to find a way to offload one of Soler or Trout. Trout ain't going anywhere, so Soler would have to be the one that goes out. I think that would be the most prudent thing for them. Allow Trout to play at DH the majority of the time, and maybe 10% of the game is in the outfield. He does not need to be in center, that's for dang sure. And so if they brought in a Mickey Moniak type that they had a year or so ago, a Harrison Bader type this offseason, I think that would be their best course of action. Maybe go after a Marte in right field, who had a really nice year for the Mets last season. Bellinger to the Mets, that's kind of my thoughts right now. 41-40 anyway between the Mets and Yankees. Take your pick. I think it's really close, but I do think he ends up more than likely on one of the Mets teams. Let's see here. Sugano would be a cheaper option for Texas as a 4-5 starter. I would say no. I don't want Sugano on this roster. I would rather have Jacob Latz in this rotation and Kumar Rocker at that point, and then sign a bunch of guys on minor league deals and see if they can break into the camp. Maybe even Patrick Corbin on a 1-year deal, say worth $3 or $4 million, I would rather have than Sugano as a 4 or 5 starter. Royals looking at Bader, yes. Giants I heard were mentioned as well. Really good defender, versatility is his calling card there. Andrew, what trade has not happened that you thought would have happened by now? Brendan Lau, that was the closest one I heard at the end of the winter meetings. I thought that one would have gotten done the Friday of winter meetings. Here we are a week later, and still nothing. So let's get these trades going, boys. I mean, what are we waiting for here? Bernie was clutch, absolutely. His strikeout rate dropped big. Polanco, as far as Polanco goes, I'm not knocking the player as far as him having a nice year last year, but to have the Mets replace Pete Alonso with Polanco, I mean, what? 40 RBI drop, 20 home run drop. Yes, you get a little bit more versatile defensively, but he's supposed to play half the games at first base. You already had a proven first baseman and a lineup protector in there for Juan Soto. Polanco is not that. Polanco is probably a 6 or 7 hitter in the Mets lineup right now as currently constructed. And while he played well for the Mariners last year, he wasn't necessarily worth this money a year ago. So is it a fluke? Also has to come into question here as well. And I'd rather have the power bat of Pete Alonso behind Juan Soto for at least the next couple of years. I do think the Mets playing hardball with Alonso last year really kind of paved the way for this to happen this offseason rather quickly. Alonso was not going to wait around and be left without a chair when the music stopped this offseason. Arenado is originally a Southern California guy, and I think the days of him choosing a contender are long gone. I kind of agree with you there, so the Angels do make sense. I would agree with you pretty much on all of that. I just think Arenado's got to be a little bit less choosy about where he goes with that no trade clause, but to a certain extent, I think he's going to try to find a team that's at least in the wild card hunt. But if the Angels are the only team that comes calling, if he really wants out of St. Louis, he might just have to agree to that deal. Upside, I'm starting to see more reports that Miami might keep both Sandia and Edward till the deadline because they're not getting the packages that they want during this offseason. I think that's purely posturing, just like I think the posturing right now around the Mavericks organization that they might hold on to Anthony Davis through the trade deadline and trade him before the draft. I think that's all posturing as well. They want to get the best draft pick they can, and so the only way to do that is to make their team a little bit worse on the court and be able to get future draft assets. And that means trading Anthony Davis for the deadline. Same thing with their expiring deal or their expiring deals that they have on a couple of guys, and for some of their older veterans like Klay Thompson and Daniel Gafford. I would say the conversations that a lot of the media have right now about Anthony Davis staying in Dallas through the season or through at least the season are very comparable with what you'd be saying here with Sandy and Edward. I expect one, if not both of those guys to be traded before we even get to spring training. I would put the reports that saying, throwing ice water onto the trade possibilities here as no more than just cold water, trying to, drive up the prices of these teams because they're not getting the offers necessarily that they think they're supposed to get, and just settling on the offer that they get after these stories have come out. Garcia gets injured. He did get injured anyway a couple of different times, and that's part of what sapped some of his good success that he made in the early strides that he made towards greater consistency in the beginning of 2024. But it's been a year and a half since those injuries really started to really pile up. He's had a few injuries last year as well, but again, he's a younger player. He's got more potential, and I think the issues he has are more solvable than they are with Osuna. I think Osuna, it's just age related. I'm surprised the Mariners aren't in on Marte. I think to a certain extent they were, but with Brendan Donovan, I think they just have more interest in him, and I think that deal is a little bit more attainable as far as an acquisition cost. Why has the why have the Angels? Why is Los Angeles wasting Mike Trout's career, and why did they? Um, they tried. They tried so many different ways to improve this roster. But the starting pitchers they brought in, we're talking Thor, Noah Syndergaard on a one-year deal, Dylan Bundy on a one-year deal. You look at their rotation right now. I forget the guy that they signed from Toronto. He was traded there at the deadline, and then he signed that big deal last year, 3-year deal worth $60 million. The name is just escaping me, but you look at the rotation. It's just that's been their biggest issue. They haven't been able to pitch since Jared Weaver retired, and even then, towards the end, things weren't working out. And this team hasn't been able to develop young talent the way they should. They lucked into Shohei Ohtani, and they weren't able to get to the postseason with both of those guys on the roster, two of the three best players in the sport at that time, and they still weren't able to get it done. They tried, but they pulled all the wrong levers, and then at the end of the Shohei Ohtani era, just completely mishandled from the top down. And it's no surprise that Mike Trout is where he is after all the decisions that they ultimately end up making. I'd trade Judge for Trout. You want to roll, bro? I would not trade Judge for Trout. Now, if you're talking prospect Judge when he was coming up and Trout was still at the top of his game, I would have done that back then. Prospects are prospects, but Aaron Judge now for Mike Trout? Yee. Report Astros are in on a top-tier pitcher, Framber Valdez. Possibly. Do you like this move of the Marlins getting Fairbanks as a possible setup man? No. I think they should be adding offense. Now, as far as adding a bullpen piece here or there, sure, but I'm looking for bargains in early February when that comes around. I'm looking for offense, ways to improve my offense so that I don't have to go bottom of the barrel, whatever's left once you get to January and February, and just saying, hey, we signed somebody. They need to do a little bit better for Marlins fan base. That pitching staff has been very good over the years. The offense has struggled basically since the death of Jose Fernandez. May he rest in peace anyway. But the pitching staff has been up and down in the beginning after the loss of Fernandez, but then they really found their groove of developing some young starting pitching. But the offense that they had with Stanton, with the Yelich, with Osuna, really just kind of disappeared right around the death of Fernandez. D. Gordon, all that crew. Very emotional time back then, but it hasn't really been right since then. And it's been a while. That's why I think they still need to find offense primarily and just worry about the bullpen last at that point. They've done a really good job identifying starting pitching and relief pitching, and I think that that mold, that pattern of success will continue. So solve the issues that you have, and let's finally solve that offense. That's adding Bellinger. Suarez is the prize. Not following you on those comments there, but as far as Bellinger, I think he's one of the top free agents to me on the board that's going to end up on one of the two New York teams. I think it's imperative for the Yankees to get that one done. I just want the Phillies to end this Nick Castellanos saga and move on. I'm now tired of hearing about this. It'll happen soon. I don't think they're going to rush it, but it will happen. Jack Curry reports are now unlikely to land Imai. Really? Really, really, really? So could the Cubs finally get a true, number one starter if Imai turns out to be that player? Could be interesting. Could be interesting. Is Artie Moreno the problem in Anaheim with them not being a legit MLB team, and will he ever sell the team? Sell? Probably not. There were rumblings around when Otani left that there might be, trying to shape things up for a seller. I doubt that happens. He loves his team, and I think he's meddles in the team in a way like Jerry Jones does occasionally in the NFL. Obviously, Jerry Jones being the GM, I think he's got his sons helping him out and so forth, Stephen Jones and so forth. But Artie Moreno is kind of a one-man band up there, of course, and then he has his Perry Manassian, that kind of GM there, who's more of a yes man than anything else. If I were the GM of that team, I would have put my foot down when I realized Otani was leaving, and I'm not allowing this franchise to get even worse by not trading the best player in the game and recouping some assets for him. If you fire me, so be it, but I would have the respect of all the other teams in the league, and my name would be, right at the top of the list of GMs that they would be looking for, to kind of solve some other team's issue. Instead, Manassian probably won't ever get another free or another GM job from another ball club ever again, based off of his handling of Otani alone. All right, let's see here. But one other thing, as far as Manassian goes, maybe just maybe he kind of negotiated a deal. Basically said, "Hey, Moreno, if you're going to go after this Otani thing and make me ride this thing in the dirt, we better come to some kind of financial agreement so that I have some cover because I'm never going to be hireable again by another front office based off of how you forced me to handle this situation." So maybe that's something we could see as well. If that's true, that means he goes to the Cubs. Imai, I'm talking about. I would love that for the Cubs. O'Hearn to the Cubs, less likely because, again, I think they're crowded in the outfield already, and especially in that infield. I think they're going to have to move some of those players in a trade one way or another. Hot Cali weather, good for homers. But then, of course, you have the marine air. I mean, that kind of knocks them down, too. Why do you think Sandy is cooked? I would trade for him. I just don't think he's nearly the pitcher he was, and I don't trust the majority of pitching coaches out there to solve his issues. I think his issues are primarily between the ears, and I think they're also in his ability to repeat his delivery. We saw the issues last year. Really great job when I was watching live on MLB.TV. I think it was the Reds broadcast crew I was listening to during that game. They were kind of watching Sandy Alcantara, and they identified the same pitch that he was throwing, and he was using like four different arm angles to try to throw the ball. And he was throwing one over the top, one a little bit more of a three quarters, one a little bit more off to the side, and then one that was just lazy, kind of a sidearm throw. He doesn't throw it the same every single time. Now, of course, any coach is going to say that's your issue first and foremost. Well, if you even solve that issue, is he now aiming the ball when he's throwing? Is he ever able to get it over the plate without getting it hit over 500 feet the other way? That would be my question as well. Does he have the track record of success? Yes. Do I believe he can get back to some level of success? To a certain degree, I would say he's going to get to some level of success again. But I don't think he's going to be a Cy Young caliber pitcher ever again unless he gets to a truly elite pitching coach and is able to really iron out any and all issues he has. So I just don't see him getting to that type of a player. And, I just would prefer many other options instead of Sandy Alcantara at this point. Upside, do you think there's any possibility Miami can get any of the hitters that are coming from Japan or Korea to partner up with Kyle? I mean, I think they could be a nice fit for Murakami or Akamoto, but again, literally any team is in on that market right now. Polanco in the lineup, I just don't like Polanco in that lineup. As far as like the options that they had on the table, and they settled on this at first base. I'm not sure if this is posturing by Arizona that they might keep Marte and bring in Bregman. I have not heard that to be legitimate at all. In fact, I've heard the opposite. Basically, the Diamondbacks are saying, yes, we're interested in Bregman, but no, we're not going to bring him in while Marte is on this roster. Because then they got to move over Lawler somewhere, and Lawler doesn't necessarily establish himself at the big league level. All kinds of things that are still brewing there in Arizona. But I think the biggest story there right now is what happens with Ketel Marte. Where does he get traded and when? I think it's a foregone conclusion he will be gone by opening day from the Diamondbacks. Imai and Fairbanks still available? They are. Why haven't the Phillies saying they're not trading Alec Boehm if he's staying? I think it's because they're on a one-year deal. You don't need to trade, or you don't need to say that these are not, or guys are not getting traded, because how many times have we seen that proclamation made by a front office only to turn around and trade him a month or so later? So I don't think that lip service really does much, but we'll see. Cheap right-handed bats for Texas. I mean, a lot of them really fit kind of what they already have, the Michael Hellmans, the Sam Haggertys of the world. But if you're looking for a cheap right-handed bat, Marte, if you wanted to bring him in, I believe he's right-handed, if I remember correctly. Other right-handed bats, Arise, if I remember correctly, is more of a lefty or a switch hitter. I can't remember which specifically, but he's not necessarily cheap. On the trade front, Augustine Ramirez from the Marlins we've talked about a little bit. There's not a whole lot of guys that I would identify as an improvement offensively. This offensive class is very thin. Harrison Bader, I guess, would be another cheap guy, but for him, that's probably a $10 million contract. Depends on what you're calling cheap. If you're saying 10 or less, then I think Bader could possibly be in that category. With the pitching coach in Texas, would the pitching coach in Texas be able to fix Sandy both mentally and helping him repeat his delivery? I don't trust the new pitching coach to be able to do that. Mike Maddox is gone. He left. He is now the pitching coach of the Los Angeles Angels. I love Mike Maddox, and the new coach that they have did a really nice job working in tandem with Mike Maddox. I think he's going to be a good pitching coach. Do I think he's going to be year one as good as Mike Maddox is? Probably not. And so that's why I wouldn't necessarily give him give him a challenging project like Sandy Alcantara. I'd keep him working with what did really well last year. They had one of the top bullpens in the game last year. The rotation was the best Texas has ever had, and getting back to that kind of leading with that strength, I think would be what's best for that young pitching coach in year one, as his as the primary pitching coach there in Texas. Texas needs starting pitching, not really a hitter. Texas had really good starting pitching last year, but they do need more. They got DeGrom, they got Eovaldi, Leiter, Latz, Rocker to a certain extent, Bradford. Injury risks are abound, so I do agree that they do need starting pitching. They are expected to add a $20 million starter this offseason, or at least somebody of that caliber, like a Cabrera, a Keller, Joe Ryan I heard thrown out at one point. I doubt that's a realistic option for them because, again, that would cost Sebastian Walcott, and I'm not about to trade him when he's about to hit the big leagues right now. So I do think Texas goes to free agency primarily for one of these starting pitchers, and then we'll see where they decide to go for a hitter. That's the question. Would it make sense for the Angels to trade Sandy and pairing Sandy with Mike Maddox? That would make a little bit more sense. The Angels, they're kind of in a no-win situation right now, and if they can recapture or get Sandy Alcantara back to being the Sandy Alcantara he was, say, 4 years ago, then they'd really have something. And then they could turn around and trade him or extend him or, any number of other things. It's a good risk for them to take, just like the trade of Taylor Ward to me was a good risk for them to take on Grayson Rodriguez. I don't think it'll work out in that case, but I think a trade of Sandy Alcantara could work there because I do have a lot of faith in Mike Maddox. Texas for Fairbanks, no, I don't really like that one either. I know a lot of people keep asking me about Pete Fairbanks. I don't see the appeal, I guess, that a lot of y'all fans do. I get he's a nice pitcher, and we had him in Texas at one point. I mean, he's a good relief option, but there's so many other options I'd rather go to, both free agency and trade. All right, let's check out X one more time just to see if anything else is happening this evening. And then we'll probably hang it up there. Incredible games tonight. Again, if you missed the basketball game tonight between the Mavs and Pistons, that was fantastic. The Warriors game was fantastic as well. And then, of course, the football game, the Seahawks versus Rams, instant classic. That might be one we see played on one of the greatest games ever in NFL history, played over and over and over again on NFL Network when the season is over. So that was a special game. Sam Darnold did not play great in the first, or at least in the first half, only threw like 4 or 5 passes, threw 2 picks in the second half, and they still won on 2 rather crazy 2-point conversions. One in the fourth quarter that was ruled initially as an incomplete pass, but then got ruled as a backwards pass that was recovered in the end zone for a successful 2-point conversion for the Seahawks. And then, of course, the 2-point conversion to win it in overtime after the Rams went down the field and scored their touchdown. Seahawks come right back down the field and do the same with a JSN touchdown, and then a 2-point conversion to the tight end over the middle. But overall, just a great night of sports out there. Hope you guys had some fun chatting about some basketball, some baseball, some little bit of NFL as well here at the Upside. Be sure to join us tomorrow night around the same time around 11 o'clock. So be sure to join us then. Appreciate you guys' support tonight and joining us this late. It's 12:47 Central Time. The guys on the East Coast, you guys are real troopers for hanging with us till 1:47 your time in the morning. But thank you guys so much for having some fun with us, talking some baseball tonight, and hopefully we finally get some bigger moves happening. Michael King, the first big domino to go in the last couple of days. Hopefully that clears up the logjam of some of the mid-tier starting pitchers. Zach Gallen and the like, hopefully get moving here. And then, of course, on the trade block, the second baseman that we've been talking about basically since the start of the winter meetings. And one of those trades hopefully gets done soon. We shall see, but, you know, we've been waiting for these trades for a while. I do think we get a flurry of them before we get to Christmas, just a matter of when. Football game was scripted and rigged. I'll put it this way. I don't think it necessarily was, but Sam Darnold could have played better in the second half for me, at least with the sacks he took, the interceptions he threw, those kinds of things. But again, that's the Sam Darnold experience for you. Jaden Daniels, he's always going to be, or he is who he always is going to be, an injury-prone player. I think he is kind of an injury-prone guy. He doesn't know how to stay healthy. Sad to see the Commanders once again have a really great rookie season by a young quarterback, Robert Griffin III, and now Jaden Daniels. I do think those two players are very similar at this point, the way I view them. So what are your thoughts on this trade? The Reds get Cabrera, Marlins get Stewart, Collier, and Sanchez. Not a bad deal. That's not a bad deal. I would probably do that for both, honestly. It's not terrible. I might want more of a bigger name piece of one or two piece return for Cabrera if I'm the Marlins. I don't necessarily want to divide up the value in him too much. If I can get three blue chipper or three decent prospects that I really have identified that I want, then so be it. But otherwise, I want at least one blue chipper in return for a very good number three starting pitcher in a rotation, a number two in a really bad rotation. But really like Cabrera. I think he's going to command a hefty return in a trade. I would try to get at least one blue chipper, borderline top 100 guy, or a late top 100 guy, and then another piece as well, rather than just kind of a grab bag. But I'm not saying that those guys are all bad or anything. I'm just saying I would rather go a little bit higher in prospect potential. All right. Appreciate you guys joining us. Again, it's getting late. I got a long day. I work literally open to close tomorrow, and then again open to close on Saturday. I'm exhausted. I need to go get a couple, drink or two before I go to bed and kind of wind down and relax a little bit. Lots to get done. And really, really do appreciate you guys spending the time with us tonight. Thank you guys for hanging with us. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Got 34 of you guys with us right now. We're up to 20 likes on the video. If you guys wouldn't mind, before you log out, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And find us on Facebook, Upside Sports Network as well. Saw a few people already follow us over there. We gained a few subscribers or at least followers on Facebook there as well. Would the Reds give up louder for him? Probably not. Probably not. I think that'd probably be a little too bit rich of an ask, which is why I think other teams might pony up more for Cabrera. The Reds are interested, don't get me wrong, but the Reds are looking in a couple of different areas for improvements. I'm not necessarily sure Cabrera's going to be the player that goes there. Cabrera, if I had to guess, like I said, probably the Cubs, Rangers, but don't be surprised if there's any number of like 7 or 8 teams that we end up hearing being connected to Cabrera over the next couple of weeks. But thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you guys again tomorrow. Again, we'll be around 11 o'clock. Hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you then.